Today I'm going to show you how to build an Ember application and hook it up to a .NET Core API through JSON API this time. So if you're not familiar with JSON API, go here to take a look at the spec. Makes things really nice when you're dealing with Ember data, and Ember data now uses JSON API by default. So so why am I making this video? Well, because I wrote a library that you can integrate into a .NET Core app called JsonAPI.NET that will build up your controllers and handle all your routing for you. So let's get started. The first thing we need to do is, since the latest version is not released yet, we need to set up the NuGet feed to point to myGet instead of just NuGet. So we can do that by going in here and editing this file. And if you go to the repository, it'll point you here. Let me bring that up real quick. So if you go to the repository, you can click on the myGet build right here, and it'll kick you off to this page, which shows you the latest pre-release version. Hopefully after this week, I'll get things cleaned up and we'll release the 0.1.4 version. So copy this guy, and actually, if you come down to the README, we need to add this location to the feed. So right here. And close out some of these extra guys. Alright, so now that we've added it to our configuration, we can go create our project. Call it JSON API app. CD in here. We use a Yeoman generator to fire up our project. Let's do a empty web API application. We'll call it API. CD API. Let's edit our project JSON file. And the version we want to use is 0.1.4-star. Over here. Hopefully it works. Yep, so you can see it's pointing to the myGet feed and fetching beta 0012. And that's just the build version, or build number. So let's create a model. And we'll call this is a to-do item. Yep. And it's just an Poco class. So it needs, we'll give it an ID. We'll give it a name. And I think that's fine for now. The next thing we need to do is we need to set up our context. So we'll just call this application DB context. And I'm going to cheat a little bit here. Okay. So again, this is working off of Entity Framework. So this won't work without Entity Framework. Oh, right. There we go. So hopefully you're familiar with Entity Framework is what I'm getting at. So our context points to our to-do items, and now we can create our database. So the first thing we want to do is add a connection string in here. We'll say database name. What do we call our app? JSON API app. And I'm just using a Postgres database. We'll need to add a few dependencies so we can do that. So I'm just adding the Postgres setup, the Postgres library, and the Entity Framework core tools, which I'll also need to add to our tools section down here. Now I'll go into startup, get rid of these guys, and let's add our database context. And we don't need MVC for right now. So add our references. Oh, let's see here. There we go, that's what we needed. Okay, so we import our app settings file. We're pointing to our connection string. Yep, data connection string. And that should be it. Let's go ahead and create our database. Migrations first. we'll also need to start our Postgres server. I had it running in another terminal, so reset it. Right. So what I just did there was I tried to add the same migration, but that's not the command I want to use. I want to update the database. Okay, let's take a look. So I'm pulling up pgadmin just to take a look at our database and see what we've got. And we've got two tables. We've got our migrations and our to-do items. Take a look. Nothing in there. That's what we expected. So there we go. We have a database. We have something we can use. So let's bring in JSON API resources. So in order to do that, and you can take a look at the README actually. README says I need to add my context and I need to set up my API. So, or set up the API services. Add our namespaces. And so what's happening here is I'm setting the default namespace, so all requests would go to my domain /API/v1/ my resource. And you'll see how that works out here in a second. I point to my context, and that's all I need to do there. The next thing we need to do is actually add the middleware. We don't need MVC. We just say add API. Add JSON or app.use JSON API. Okay, so now we need to add our resource. Now you can think of a resource as a view model. If you're familiar with JSON API resources, which is the Ruby a similar implementation only for Ruby on Rails, it's kind of like that, a little bit different. And we use AutoMapper, so you can do different kinds of mapping. So for example, if my domain model has a first name and last name of a person, but I want my view model to just have display name or something, I could say concatenate that from the domain model into my resource. So let's add a to-do item resource. Now the resource must implement JSON API resource. Other than that, it's just a POCO class. And really, as of right now, the only requirement is that you have an ID string. We chose string because that supports GWIDs, integers, anything, and in the JSON API spec, IDs are passed down as strings. And we want the name. Now, what we need to do is we need to take our model and point it to our resource. We can just do that with that attribute helper. Okay. So let's check the README. We added our services, we added the middleware, we defined our resource. This describes how you can do the mapping. If you want, you can override controllers, but that looks like it. So not what I wanted to do. Okay. So let's give it a shot. Unsupported media type. So in the JSON API spec, you're required to include an accept header, which I believe I have one over here already actually. If there's content in the request, it must have the same thing in the content type, and that header must be included. So we have nothing in our to-do items, so it returned an empty response, empty set. Just add one in here. Make sure it got added. Send the request again. There it is. And I can link out here, and so there's a link right here to the resource itself. If I do that, you'll see the difference here is now I'm receiving back a singular object rather than the list of to-do items. And this is how Ember Data works with JSON API anyways. It manages all your relationships for you. Okay. So pretty straightforward. You don't have to add any controllers. You can if you want. If you need to do some extra business logic, some validation, anything like that, there's a description in the README of how to do that. You just create a controller, which must implement JSON API controller and may inherit from the JSON API controller. So what's next? We want to build an Ember app. Actually, let's set up our relationships first, just so we have something a little bit more interesting. So we need a person, and we need a person resource. Drop in here, drop a person here, and we'll just give them the same things. So a person can have multiple to-do items. A to-do item gets a person name, or sorry, person ID, and the navigation property. Might just need to build. We'll see what happens. So just like here. Actually, we can just copy the whole thing down. Pretty simple example. Okay. So let's add our migrations. Actually, add our people here. So let's take a look at the migration real quick. Make sure I didn't fudge that up. So we're going to create a people table, add the person ID to to-do items. Looks good. What we'll need to do is get rid of this guy though. Maybe it'll work. Okay. Migrations applied. Let's take a look. Okay, so we have people, which has an ID and a name. We have to-do items, which has a person ID. Looks good. And yep, we got the index. So got a little relationships going. Let's just test it real quick. Make sure we can request people. Yep, good to go. So let's build a member app. And we'll do Ember new. Let's call it client. Wait while that installs. This is the part where you can fast forward the video. Well, while we're waiting, I'll just create some to-do items and some people. So let's say we have a John Doe. And we have do something with a person ID of 1. Okay. Are we good? Good. Okay, so what do we need to do first? Well, first we need to point to our API. So in order to do that, we will go into our config directory and our environment.js. Okay, and we'll add a little information about our app, like the namespace. Now we need to define our adapter. Now if you were using Rails, I believe Ember defaults to localhost 3000. So you wouldn't have to do this during development. But it's not too bad. So I just I'm going to extend the JSON API adapter, and I'm going to override the host value and the namespace value with those in my environment configuration. So the next step is to create our model. And we'll call this a person. Person has a name, and it has many to-do items. We'll add our to-do item. And our to-do item has a name and belongs to a person. Pretty straightforward. The next thing we'll do is set up our router. So we're going to have a people route that lists the people, a show route, which will be displayed when you click on a person, and then we'll have the to-do items for that person. So start with our routes. First route is people. And all we're going to do is we're going to go to the store and get all of the person models. So now I'm looping over all the models and yielding out person name. So let's see if that works. Of course it is. So this is a CORS issue. So what we need to do is we need to enable CORS on our API. In order to do that, come back into startup. And add a little one-liner. Now what you would actually want to do is maybe have something that says if environment is development. Yeah, well, we'll just do it. So now I'm just saying if we're in the development environment, allow localhost 4200 with any header, with any method, and allow credentials. So swing back over here, try it again. Right, so if you look here, start it up in production. In order to change the environment, and right, okay. We need to add cores to the services. So you see we add the dependencies for the middleware here, and we set up the middleware. And there we have it. What you see is we have a request go out for people, the response, and a link. So let's add our show route. And we're going to go get person where the person ID is in the parameters of the URI. So if you go back to the router, you'll see that I'm say show path person ID, and after model we get the to-do items. We can log them. That's not really necessary, but we'll log if there's an error. And then let's go do our template. So we're going to list the name of the person, and we'll provide a link to their to-do items. So let's set that up. So in our to-do items route, we're going to go get the model for people.show, and then we'll go get their to-do items. And in the to-do items template, we'll iterate over the model. And display the name for the to-do item. So click on John Doe, displays John Doe and his to-do items. So let's take a look at the request here. First thing I do is I go get people. I say give me all the people, and that's the people route. The next thing I do is I don't need to send a request for a person because it's already in the store. We already have it. If I were to reload, you should see this come back out first. So what do? Next, I click the link and I get the to-do items, which returns the to-do items for John Doe. So let's try something a little bit different. We'll add a new person. And come back over here. Let's add some breaks in here to make it a little more readable. Okay. So, list of people. Select Jane Doe, Jane, and Jane's to do. John Doe, John Doe, John's to do. So, that's a pretty trivial example, but shows you how powerful the JsonApiDotNetCore library can be. Maybe next week I'll do another video demonstrating how to push updates, how to create records, how to delete records, things like that. All of which are supported by the app currently. Alright, that's all I've got.